Hi, my name is Kasey, and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with codependency, control, perfectionism, impulsivity, rage, and people-pleasing. My dad is an alcoholic, and my mom a codependent. I am an adult child of an alcoholic. As a child, I lived in fear of my father. I was scared of him and his explosive anger. He would come home from work, usually very angry, and I would peer out the bedroom door to see what mood he was in and to decide to what degree I was going to avoid him for the evening. This is where I learned to walk on eggshells and check the temperature of the room. As a child, I was silly and outspoken. I loved to laugh and make jokes. Now, thinking back, I recognize that I used humor to cut the pain of not feeling loved or accepted by others, especially by my father. To cope with my pain of not being good enough, perfectionism became my drug. I had an insatiable drive to be perfect in everything I did, whether that was school, work, my job, or the arts. This perfectionism delivered great immediate results for me in my education. However, it destroyed my personal self-esteem because I couldn't be perfect and I would fail others. Fortunately, in the midst of my family's insanity, I grew up with a relationship with Jesus. Since I can remember, I went to church with my grandmother. However, this is where I learned to try to be the perfect Christian girl. My mask wearing became a normal part of my life, and I hid my struggles and imperfections. In my last semester of college, I began a year-long internship at a church as a youth ministry intern. Not long after this, I was soon hired as a student ministry director at that church. During this season, encouraged by a mentor, I went to counseling to work on some of my issues. I went to the library and legitimately rented every single book on being an adult child of an alcoholic that I could. I was bound and determined to not be identified as an adult child. And while I began to acknowledge some of my issues, I had no idea that the Lord wanted to heal me of so much more. My first couple years as a youth pastor were great, but of course had a few bumps in the road. Although I loved my job, the students I got to know, my perfectionism, it caused great feelings of inadequacy, self-loathing, self-doubt, and waves of, I love my job, I hate my job. I recognized I was often triggered anytime someone said they needed to talk to me. Anytime I wasn't perfect, it would send me into a spiral of depression and anxiety. I would find myself searching for jobs online as an escape from the fear I was experiencing. Fear that I wasn't a good enough leader, speaker, or friend ravaged my peace and bled into my relationships with others. And just like any good, unhealthy person, I decided to invite someone else into my mess. In my 4th year of student ministry, I met my then husband. I had such high expectations for my marriage. My dreams and hopes came crashing to the floor when we weren't getting along. We were having explosive fights. I would rage on my ex. When I wasn't able to control my ex-husband, I would use my words to tear him apart. And the divorce word was used on me more than once, and it became paralyzing for me. It wasn't 3 months into the marriage before my ex called the pastor and told him about our struggles. I was at first furious with my ex for letting others know we were struggling. I would go to church and everyone would ask how the newlyweds were, and I would just say, it's great, even though I was absolutely miserable. I was trying to maintain this image of perfectionism. I couldn't bear the thought of being a failure in my marriage when I'm in ministry, and I expected myself to hold it all together. Eventually, my pastor, my ex, and I sat down and decided that I needed to step out of ministry for a few weeks to focus on healing. I shared with the students and the youth volunteers about my marriage struggles, which in turn left me feeling very exposed. This made me want to wear a mask even more. I felt like everyone knew my shame secret. I was really embarrassed, and so I became very resentful. I wanted to run, and I felt like no one knew the whole story. After taking a few weeks off of ministry, I was just so unhappy with where my life was at this time that I decided to step down. This was one of the saddest decisions for me, as I felt like a failure. A failure as a youth pastor, a wife, and a Christian. I was at my rock bottom, and I was getting desperate for my marriage to change. Truthfully, I wanted him to change. But I've learned through the steps that the only person I can change is myself. One of the things I picked up was a book about prayer that I had received from a friend. And I was willing to do whatever I could to fix my mess. So I began reading that book. Chapter 1 of this book hit me the hardest. One of the lines says this: it's not about who needs to change, it's about who's willing to change. And it was at that point that I decided I needed to change and I needed to do something different. I had a lot of preconceived notions about Celebrate Recovery at that time. I thought I didn't need recovery, but I was willing to try anything to get me out of the pain I was in. I went to CR at my lowest, and I reached out to someone in recovery and began the conversation of asking them to be my sponsor by saying, I know you are probably too busy to sponsor, which looking back now was a way for me to protect myself from rejection. And I'm so glad that this person saw through that and through my self-protection and called me out on it. That's a good sponsor, and was willing to be my sponsor. It was at this point that I started working the steps, and I decided to take care of me. I charged as fast as I could into my recovery. I learned a lot about serenity, about how to keep it and not give it away. I learned that I was responsible for my peace. I also learned a lot about my control issues. First, that I had some. I learned that my perfectionism was driving my control. And I was so concerned about being perfect that I would control anything and everything in my path to make things look perfect. While I was working my program, I was able to see how manipulative I was, how I would try to punish my ex for hurting me, and I started making progress. I learned how to not get on the roller coaster. I had accountability. I joined a step study. I made phone calls. And I already had a relationship with Jesus, and he was all I had to cling to during this spiral downward. But my relationship with him grew because of recovery. It was like Jesus got into every crack and crevice of my life through recovery. There were parts of me that I didn't even know needed healing. God used groups on Monday nights, my sponsor and accountability partners, to show me what's true about me and what's true about Jesus. As I was working my program, I was growing in boundaries and health, and I started to learn what was acceptable and unacceptable for me. In 2018, I had reached my limit for my marriage. I had uncovered some things for me that were very hurtful. I knew in my journaling that God was speaking to me and giving me grace through such a painful moment. I had serenity that only could come from God. It was one of the most tragic yet peaceful moments of my life. I have so much gratitude for what God brought me through. My broken marriage brought me to recovery, and I tell people all the time that I would go through it all again if I came out as happy and healthy as I am today. Amen. After my divorce, I took some time off from dating. I grew in friendships with some of my fellow recovery girls, and these friendships are some of the most life-giving and wonderful friendships I have ever had. The time off from dating was full of peace, self-reflection, healing, and goodness, and I would never trade it for anything in the world. In 2019, after my year of singleness, I started to date again and eventually met my now husband. And there was a part of me that kept working in my program during that time, but I would be lying if I didn't tell you that there wasn't a part of me that went into relapse. I used COVID as an excuse to not completely stay in contact with my community and even cut off some of my most life-giving relationships. I traveled into a shame spiral and secrecy, and I had to go back and make amends to those folks that I hurt during my shame spiral. And when I reached out to those ladies, they were there with open arms and met me right where I was at. I'm grateful to have a program to work, a community that is willing to love me even when I relapse. But the truth is, I don't have to go into those old Kasey behaviors because I have tools to forge a new path now. My husband and I got married in 2022, and we started on a journey of trying to get pregnant right away. We were unsuccessful for 2 years, and infertility is something that has taught me powerlessness in a whole new way. My infertility pushed me to a place of surrender and pain that I never knew. In light of these challenges, we began IVF. I was in so much fear of the future and really battled with feelings of being not good enough. I began to prioritize my recovery through counseling, reading, and book clubs. This season, despite the difficulty, I was able to maintain a healthy space due to working my program. I'm glad to share we gave birth to our first child in April of 2024, and he is the light of my life. My journey into momhood has not been easy. I found myself tired, as most new parents usually do, but initially struggled with the feeling of not being good enough. I thought something was wrong with me. I wasn't quite sure why I was firing on all cylinders like I normally do, and I really began to beat myself up. I made a phone call to my sponsor, and she gave me tools and grace that helped me have compassion for myself. Being a mom has been one of the most challenging experiences of my life. I've been diagnosed with postpartum depression, and it took me a while to come to terms with this reality. I felt a ton of shame and guilt. I didn't want to tell anybody I was struggling. And this tends to be a common theme for me. I spiraled into not caring for myself in ways that I knew would be beneficial. I describe my postpartum depression as feeling like I have zero energy and the longest list of things to do ever. It became daunting to get up every day. I finally got to a place that I told my husband I needed help, and I had to talk to my doctor about what I was experiencing. I realized that once I said postpartum depression out loud, it wasn't as scary as I made it out to be, which is honestly one of my favorite new tools. If I say something out loud, particularly to a safe person like an accountability partner or sponsor, it often loses its power and its largeness in my head. I would like to tell you that I have conquered my PPD. Not quite there yet, but I have made progress. I'm getting better at caring for myself by doing things like washing my face at night and drinking water and even going to church. Those are big wins in my book. I've also learned progress is not about speed, it's about direction, and I think I'm headed the right direction. Candidly, since having my son, I haven't been consistent in my recovery. And not long ago, one of my CR sisters called and encouraged me and asked me to dig back in. I know that recovery has helped me in the past, and I am making the decision to step back in. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here often. And I'm looking forward to doing a step study this fall. I have confidence that tools and support that have worked for me in the past will offer me experience, strength, and hope in this new season I find myself in. My favorite step and the most difficult step for me are one and the same. Step one, we admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is my sinful nature. This is my favorite step because this is the first step towards healing, and this is the hardest step because I had to admit that I have a problem and I am not God. Even though I have a tendency to think I can control everything, I couldn't manhandle my life anymore, and that wasn't fun because blaming others was so much easier. Because of my recovery, my relational health has skyrocketed. I've learned to check my motives and not take responsibility for others. I've gotten better about working tools when I get triggered instead of reacting in unhealthy ways, most of the time. One of the most influential and powerful tools that I have found is the journaling tool. Whether using my daily moral inventory or a situation that has come up, I will ask God, what do you have to say to me about, and fill in the blank. It's through this journaling that I've learned to hear the voice of God. He teaches me a lot about himself with this tool, as well as a lot about myself. Journaling has impacted me the most. It gives me the space and the opportunity to tune the voice of God into my current circumstance. And while I often want my journaling to be God telling me everything I did right and everything everyone else did wrong, it's not often that. It's usually a process of the Lord showing me sin I never saw and the Lord navigating difficult, impossible, dangerous conversations. The biggest gift I've received from recovery has been hearing the voice of God in a much clearer way. I could hear God's voice prior to recovery, but it was at my rock bottom when I had nothing else and no one else that God found me and spoke to me loudly. I believe it was through desperation and my reach for God that something clicked in my brain and God's voice became louder. As I continue to grow in my recovery, I can't help but tell others what God has done in my life. I want others to experience that hope that I have found. When I first came to recovery, I was so ashamed of my mess and didn't want anyone to know about my baggage. But I'm not ashamed anymore, but grateful for what he has brought me from. I want to express my gratitude to those who have walked this journey with me, who stepped into my life and work alongside me in my program. My sponsor, my accountability partner, my friends, my husband who gets to hear all of my recovery jargon and tools and how to work a program. I've learned that life is best done in deep, meaningful, candid relationships. And recovery isn't a me program, it's a we program. And it's through this amazing support system that I'm finding hope. To the newcomer or the person who doesn't think recovery is for them, I encourage you to give the program a shot. Even if your life isn't falling apart, recovery can help you grow to look more like Jesus. Recovery helped me become a better me. I imagine God wants to do the same with you. Thanks for letting me share.